Hi, I'm a Possum and I find garbage, and I just watched The Nun II, the latest movie in the Conjuring universe. I know this movie came out like a month ago, but I'm reviewing it now because that's all I have to work with. I'm not going to review Taylor Swift's The Eras Tour a few days before Halloween. Anyway, I watched the first Nun movie literally less than an hour before I saw The Nun 2 because I'd seen it before but couldn't remember anything that happened in it because these Conjuring universe movies are all just terrible. And I'm blackpilled by the fact that they seem to have become the current gold standard for horror films. This is what normies want, so this is what I'm stuck reviewing. Here's the one positive thing I have to say about The Nun 2. The first Nun movie had a bunch of that stupid Marvel humor in it, where something serious would be happening, and the stupid comedy relief sidekick would chime in with something that just deflates it. You don't always need a comedy relief. You can just let a horror movie be a horror movie. The Nun 2 doesn't have any of that, at least not that I can remember. So there's that. The absolute curse that was the MCU's influence on all entertainment might finally be subsiding. And then again, this movie is just as stupid as any of the more recent MCU movies. One thing that doesn't make sense is that it's explained in the first movie that the nun is actually a demon named Valak, who took the form of a nun because that movie took place in an abbey and it wanted to blend in with the other nuns. I mean, it's not a very good disguise because it still just looks like a monster with gray skin and glowing eyes, but that at least kind of explains why there's an evil nun. But within the logic of this movie, there's no reason for Valak to still be disguising itself as a nun. This movie takes place in a boarding school, so following the logic of the first movie, it should be disguising itself as a kid or something. But the movie's called The Nun II, so I guess it's just forever stuck in nun form, because even the powers of Satan are no match for the status quo. Speaking of the status quo, this movie has pretty much all of the modern horror movie tropes. There are a lot of moments where it goes quiet just before a jump scare. There's a part where a character sees a kid running away for no reason and they follow them. And they even do that stupid thing where the characters see what they think is a dead loved one and they follow them, but that turns out to be a ghost or a demon or something playing a trick on them, because no one in movies ever stops to think, hey, that looks like my kid, but it can't possibly be him because he died like 10 years ago. There's something fishy about this. You know, I see these things in a lot of horror movies, but I can't think of many examples off the top of my head, because the ones that do these things are the ones I tend to forget about immediately after watching them. And that's the real problem with this movie. It does nothing new or interesting. It just sticks with all the tired and predictable old tricks, and it doesn't even do them all that well. There's actually a moment where I laughed out loud. There's a scene where they have a guy who's possessed by a demon all chained up, and they leave him somewhere to go look for the magic MacGuffin. And it cuts back to him, and for no reason at all, a bird just flies by in the background and makes a loud noise. It's completely unprompted. It's like they thought the movie was too quiet for too long, so they just CGI'd a bird into the background of some random scene and had it make a noise. It didn't even sound like a bird. It was just like, bah! It was stupid and pointless, like that scene in Citizen Kane where the parrot screeches for no reason, other than some studio executive complained it was too boring, so Orson Welles put that in as a joke. I guess I should explain what happens in the movie. Spoilers ahead. The main guy from the first Nun movie, Father Burke, isn't even in this one. It's mentioned that he died of some disease off camera, which really just means they couldn't get that actor to come back. So now the new protagonist is Irene, the nun in training from the first movie, and the Vatican sent her to investigate a string of mysterious deaths because they think the nun demon had something to do with them, and she's the only one alive who's dealt with it before, aside from that guy Maurice who everyone called Frenchie. Now, the first Nun movie ended with a shot revealing Maurice had a scar on the back of his neck in the shape of an upside-down cross, and it flashed forward to that scene from The Conjuring 20 years later with Hal and Lorraine Warren. This is a pickup because I realized after I had already recorded this review that I accidentally referred to Ed Warren as Hal Warren. I guess I confused him with the guy who directed Manos: The Hands of Fate. I did not do that to be funny, that's like an actual accident I made. I'm gonna leave it in. Giving a lecture about demonic possession in which they show a film of his exorcism. Maurice is possessed throughout this whole movie but doesn't know it until near the end. and this movie takes place 4 years after the first one, so I guess no one noticed the upside-down cross on his neck and mentioned it to him, and he never felt it in the shower, and so he was never like, oh, that might have something to do with the one time I got in a fight with an actual demon. I should probably get that looked at. And he's apparently successfully exorcised at the end of this movie, so when did Hal and Lorraine exorcise him? When did they get the opportunity to film Maurice before he was no longer possessed? Did he get repossessed at some point? Are they just gonna make him possessed again in the next movie? And what would the next movie even be about? There's nothing to work with here. The Nun II has very little plot. Whatever story it has is just a framework to hang on a bunch of spooky setups. A scene will start with a character looking around, something will move in the background, maybe the nun appears but they don't see it, or they think they see it and it's not really there, or they do see it and it reaches out to grab them, or the sound drops out to signal a jump scare's about to happen, stuff like that. That's the whole movie. It's just a series of loosely connected scenes you've seen a million times if you've ever seen a horror movie before. There's no substance, it's just a bunch of crap. It's like a carnival ride. Not even a theme park ride, but a carnival ride. Like if you've ever gone to a carnival where they rip you off and you eat overpriced funnel cakes while playing unwinnable games, and they have that one ride where you sit in a little cart on a track and a plastic skeleton pops out to startle you. That's what all modern horror movies are, and this is just another one of those. And most of it doesn't even make sense. At some point, Irene and her black sidekick, whose name I can't remember, go to some kind of Vatican archive, and the archivist speculates that the demon nun might have once been an angel. Now, I was under the impression that all demons are fallen angels. Like, that's the lore, right? All of the angels who followed Lucifer during the war in heaven were kicked out and became demons. But I guess the filmmakers assume their audience doesn't know the lore of the world's most popular religion, and the dominant religion of the English-speaking world, so they have to spell it out for us because we're all just a bunch of dumb apes who believe that inflation is just grocery stores price gouging. Anyway, the nun demon used to be an angel and it wants to get a holy artifact called the Eyes of St. Lucy because that will supposedly restore its angel powers, and something bad will happen if that happens. So Irene has to find the MacGuffin first, and the archivist happens to know that the Eyes of St. Lucy are at this boarding school because it used to be an abbey, and someone hid them there at some point in the past. That's why the demon is in the boarding school. The demon somehow knows that's where the eyes are, so it's just taking its time finding them. Why the demon can't just kill Irene instead of putzing around in Maurice's body is never explained. Well, because then the movie would end, and there's no possible way they could have written it so something else happened. Speaking of which, yes, the demon could easily just kill everyone. It demonstrates the ability to kill whoever it wants at any given time, apparently without limitations, and it seems to do so without rhyme or reason. The first thing that happens in the movie is the demon nun shows up in a church somewhere and lights a priest on fire. You can't even say that holy people are immune to its powers and that's why it can't just kill everyone, because it evidently can. And to even really have a reason to kill that priest, by the way. The demon just kills a bunch of priests and nuns around Europe for no reason, and this gets the attention of the Vatican, which sends Irene after it. So by doing that, all it did was endanger its own plans. Really, the demon could have just went straight to the boarding school in Maurice's body, and Maurice was hired as the groundskeeper, so it could have just went anywhere it wanted in the school and looked around for the MacGuffin at its own leisure. But no, it just had to draw attention to itself because the movie needed spooky shenanigans, regardless of whether or not they were justified by the narrative. Never mind the fact that it goes against the demon's motivations, it just has to jump scare people. It just has to let Irene, the one person who could stop it, know that she's on the loose by appearing on a magazine rack in defiance of the movie's own internal logic. Remember, no one but the demon knows the MacGuffin is in the boarding school except for this one incidental character who I guess the demon decided not to kill before he told Irene, even though it has the power to be anywhere it wants at any given time, it is apparently omniscient. And no one knows Maurice is possessed. The demon has every advantage in this situation, but it screws up its own plans because it was written to be an idiot. The only reason the good guys win is because the demon was too stupid to succeed. It's stupid writing, and there's even a scene where the demon kills someone and it has absolutely no bearing on the rest of the movie. Some delivery girl shows up somewhere, lets herself in, hears a guy making choking noises and goes to investigate, as slowly as possible of course, and ends up getting her neck snapped. And it's never brought up again. It's like the scene was tacked on because the movie wasn't long enough. That's the type of thing I see in the stupid shot-on-video movies I review. And much like those movies, The Nun II isn't scary. There's exactly one moment when it kind of comes close to being scary, and that's when this inexplicable goat man appears and goes running down a flight of stairs toward this kid who just stands there in the doorway screaming. And I'm just thinking, shut the door, you idiot. Fortunately for her, the only black character in the movie pushes her through the door and closes it. One of those kids says the goat man is the devil, and I guess the devil is just a mindless monster who runs around on all fours, attacking whatever it sees like a xenomorph or something, never doing anything that could be called intelligent, and it can be thwarted by a wooden door. This actually happens twice. There are two scenes where they're being chased by the devil goat man, and they run through a door and slam it shut in his face, and he can't do anything about it. I guess the devil doesn't have the power to bust down a wooden door. He does manage to stab his horns through a door and impale a kid through the shoulder, but absolutely nothing comes of it. Like, a kid gets impaled, but then nothing happens to her. It's like the movie just forgets about it. In fact, the goat man just comes out of nowhere with no explanation, at least none that I can remember. And then it just kind of disappears from the movie after the nun is defeated. We never get a scene of it getting killed or sent back to Goatland or whatever. It's just like the movie just forgot about that too. Either a bunch of scenes got deleted, or this whole Goatman thing was just tacked on to give Sidekick Lady and the kids something to do while Irene fought the nun. And that's the problem with this movie. Things just sort of happen and nothing makes sense. We don't know what the rules are because the movie is written backwards. Instead of scenes being written with the nun's motivations and abilities in mind, the nun's motivations and abilities seem to change based on the needs of the scene. At one moment, it can appear in a church somewhere hundreds of miles away from the body it's possessing and light a random priest on fire, and at another, it has to physically chase a child around on foot to get the MacGuffin it's been looking for. If the nun can appear in a magazine rack and pop out to strangle Irene, then it should be able to kill Irene, but it doesn't do that because the plot needs Irene to survive until the end of the movie. So why not just not give the nun the ability to be anywhere at any given time? You might argue that the nun being inconsistent makes her unpredictable and that makes her scarier, but it doesn't. It just makes her look stupid. A character who is capable and willing to do anything and everything, regardless of their motivations, just doesn't have a character. They're not even a character at that point, they're just a plot device. You know how in It, Pennywise has to scare the children because making people afraid of him is how he gets his powers, and that's why he doesn't just kill the kids? The nun doesn't have anything to explain why it does the things it does. There are no rules or consistency, and the problem with that is a lack of consistency removes any sort of grounding that makes it believable. This is something I bring up a lot when talking about sci-fi or fantasy. In order to have any sort of emotional impact, it needs to be believable, and in order to be believable, it needs to be consistent. The same applies to horror. Just like how we can't feel sad for a character dying in a world in which you can bring the dead back to life, we can't feel afraid for a character when we know the rules are inconsistent and they will always be written out of a corner by the writer just choosing to ignore their own rules, no matter what happens, and the only characters who ever die are the unimportant ones and nothing ever has any lasting consequence. And that's not to say that we, the audience, need to understand the rules on a conscious level. We don't always need the rules explained to us, but we know when something feels out of place. For example, imagine if you were watching The Shining, but instead of Jack going crazy and chasing Danny with an axe, all of the ghosts just popped out and started chasing him. The reason that idea sounds intuitively stupid to you is because The Shining is a story about a father going crazy and trying to murder his family, and the ghosts only ever tell him what to do. If the ghosts had the ability to kill Danny and Wendy, they would have just done so themselves at the beginning of the movie. The fact that the ghosts don't just do it themselves implies that they can't, and that's why they exploit a guy's mental instability. And that works thematically because it's ultimately a story about abuse. Or look at something like A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger can do pretty much anything, but only in dreams. There's a clear limit to his powers, and this informs what the characters should or shouldn't do to stop him. And we also know that he wants to get revenge on the people who killed him, so we know he's going after a specific group of people, so we have some idea of what he will or won't do. Notice how none of this applies to the Nun II. The nun just does whatever, regardless of whether or not it furthers its goals. The Demon Nun is stupid because the plot needs it to be. The audience is willing to suspend disbelief for a movie about ghosts and demons, but they still expect it to make sense according to its own internal logic, which this movie does not because it has no internal logic. It's just stuff happening, and it's all the same stuff we've seen in a million other horror films. The Nun II is not worth watching. It's the type of thing you put on as background noise during a Halloween party where no one's going to be actually paying any attention to it. Alright, that's all I have to say about The Nun II. Subscribe if you're not already, and if you are, check my channel for other videos you may have missed since YouTube doesn't always tell you when I upload. And don't forget to like this video and leave a comment for the algorithm. And send me your fan art and support me on Patreon. The links are below. Bye.